Welcome back, everybody, to Talk3D, and this is episode 3. I'm here with Felix again, and we are going to talk about the progress in the 3D printing industry. So Felix, welcome back.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So today, the theme I want to have to talk about is kind of the progress in the industry. So, we've been in this for I've been in this for about 7 to 5 years, and you've been in it for maybe a little bit less?
Like 4 years,
4 years?
Now, yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about the past 3 years.
All right.
What have you seen in the past 3 years? And what were you doing 3 years ago when you entered the industry, and were those expectations met?
Ooh, that's a good question still. So 3 years ago, I was running my own business, just running it as a 3D printing service for people. And I started off with, kind of like a kit printer, and things were kind of expensive and not that much better. So like 3 years ago, you were looking at like the Ultimaker 2 Plus. And that was a professional printer. And then I had a kit that kind of printed almost maybe a good level of quality comparatively. And today we have printers like the Fuse 1, like the Ultimaker S5, like the BCN3D W50. So those printers came from, the Ultimaker came from like wooden printers, and now they're at this prosumer level where like big companies use these printers every single day. So that is probably where we were, and now we're here today, and hopefully the future is brighter. A lot has happened in between.
So I feel like that's a theme for a lot of people and a lot of our customers as well, is they got into the industry through being a service bureau, like a mini service bureau, or joining 3D hubs back in the day. So that's how you got in as well. So that's the beginning of your story. So tell us a little bit about your discovery process in terms of, well, I was looking into this industry, I got interested, and how did you fall into being kind of a service bureau?
Yeah, so I was 3 years ago or 4 years ago, I was working an internship at an automotive company, and I made some money. I decided to buy a kit just to learn, just so I can make things at home, prototype, just increase my engineering skills, because I don't have space for a CNC or anything like that. So that is why I got into it. And then my printer was mostly idling. And then I heard about 3D Hubs, which was a platform for people with 3D printers to get on and just sell parts for people. And that is how I started. And then I saw that increase and increase and increase to the point where I was like, okay, I can do this, full time if I really put my mind to it. So that was how I got into it. And then so that was my story.
And that's, I think, a lot familiar to a lot of our viewers as well. Is
sure.
When you start looking into the industry, you see some margin where you can have a profit and do the thing that you really love. And I think that's something that we haven't talked about yet is, obviously you're still in the industry. You've been doing services for a while. So you obviously like it a lot more than just being a job. So tell me a little bit about, your passion for the 3D printing industry.
Yeah, I think, so I'm an engineer, so that's my training, that's my background, and making things is like kind of what I like to do, and 3D printing enables me to do that. So if I have an idea today and I want to prototype something or make something that's just useful for my car, for my house, for maybe I want to sell a product, I tried that, didn't work out for me. But the idea is, if you're good at designing things, you can design something in an hour if you're good, and then you'll print it out in the next 3 hours, and then you'll have something in your hands. And then you can give it to your friend and be like, hey, use this, tell me what you think about it. So for me, this like fast iteration, prototyping, and getting things to the market, kind of what Frank did, is really exciting for me. And actually making useful things with 3D printing is exciting to me. So that is my passion. And also helping people achieve their kind of, they're like, I don't know what to use. I don't know if this is right for me. I don't know if this printer is right for me. I don't know if this filament is right for me. And giving them that information, and then them taking that and actually either making money or solving a problem is just exciting for me. So.
And I can still see that passion in your eyes, so that's awesome. But 3 years ago, we still had this capability. So what is the difference? What happened in between? Because back then when we had the Ultimaker 2 or even the Ultimaker original, it was still running off the same technological process. So we're still using the same fundamentals of 3D printing as we did 3 years ago, except we have the Form 1, not the Form 3. So what is your experience upgrading through the years from having some of those simpler kit printers to what we have now with the S line and the Form 3 series. What have you noticed, and has that changed how you do business?
So I think the biggest thing in that whole little package you described is the knowledge that we have out there. So 3 years ago, 5 years ago, 7 years ago, you couldn't go on Google, type in 3D printing, and then find what you needed. But today we have this massive knowledge base, and Ultimaker, BCN, Formlabs have written massive knowledge bases for people to just buy a printer today and start printing 5 minutes from the moment they opened it. So it stopped becoming this big hassle to learn about 3D printing and all that stuff to a point where it's a tool like your drill. So I think that is probably the biggest step from 3 years ago, 4 years ago to today. You know, you can buy a printer, print the same day. You don't need to be even enthusiastic about 3D printing. For you, it's just a tool that makes stuff. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where it is today, and it's just becoming easier, smarter. Just the barrier to enter this market has drastically just decreased.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. And I really want to move the timeline to the present now that you brought us here. Mm. If you were entering the industry now, you know, would you be entering in a different way, knowing that there are printers with more capabilities, with more support, with more knowledge out there? Mm-hmm. You know, if you were just discovering 3D printing, desktop 3D printing now, you know, what would interest you if it's not the same as what was 3 years ago?
You know, so 3 years ago, if I knew what I know today.
Okay, good,
so
that's good.
Hindsight is 20/20. I would get a printer that can print a lot of things at the same time. Okay. So like the Fuse One would have probably been an option at the price range that it is at. The W27 would have been an option for me, because buying like 13 printers, which is, I think I got up to like 15 at some point. Yeah. And then because you need the capacity, instead of buying a printer like the W50, which has everything you need plus a duplication mode, or the Fuse One, which just will print parts constantly at a pretty low price and faster than a FDM 3D printer would, that would have been on the table for me, right, which wasn't on the table 3 years ago. Right. Or, you know, you had or you just had printers that were just not as capable and weren't as attractive. At least that's how I think today.
Do you feel like that if you spent more money now on a bigger investment, that it would pay off better than spending a lot of small investments on 15 different types of printers?
I think so.
Is that a consideration?
I think so, because even though I had 15 different printers, I didn't really increase the capabilities that I had. Okay. Yes, I could produce parts faster, because instead of making 15 parts on one printer, I would make 15 parts on 15 different printers, you know, drastically decreasing lead times. Right. But I didn't have more capability. I didn't have the soluble support. I didn't have duplication mode. I didn't have the ability to print in SLS. Right. So it was just the same technology making the same thing, but I didn't have more to offer people. Right. But today things are so good where it's not hard to use. You can just buy an S5 and you're good to go. You can print whatever you want, any material you want, without even thinking about it. Right. That's the main thing.
So you hear that, people? Now it's so good. Now they're in the golden age, you know, of 3D printing again, where you can get a printer and expect it to be running and printing the same day. Yeah. Okay, so that's a good encapsulation of going from the past to the present. I do want to focus on a couple of things at the present, because, you know, recently you just brought up the Fuse One, which is brand new. You've only had a week's worth of experience on it, but it's kind of changed your mindset a little bit in terms of 3D printing, because we've never had SLS capability available to us since this year. Mm-hmm. So give me your thoughts on SLS desktop 3D printing.
So actually, just to bring it back again, but at the time, once I got 215 printers, I was seriously looking at getting a bank loan to buy a DHB multi-jet. And I was like very close to just going through the whole process. But then I decided not to, because it was I think $250,000. Yes. And I ended up not doing it. But if I had the option to buy the Fuse One and invest that money, I would have. Okay. Right? So just using it for a week, you don't really need much infrastructure. You need a dedicated 20 amp circuit and you're good to go. So it means you can set up in your basement. Right. Right. So for me, using this printer has been just as easy as using the Form 3, which if people had this printer, or the Form 2. If people have this printer, they know exactly what I'm talking about. You know, the workflow is preform, print, clean your parts, sell your parts.
And repeat.
And repeat. right? And with the Fuse One, you can stack parts in 3D. You can print in real nylon 12, which means you have basically isotropic properties, which means it's almost as good as injection molding something. So it's very interesting.
Right.
Yeah, the Fuse One is going to be very interesting this year.
So if you were entering it hard now,
yeah,
that is something that you would focus on.
For sure, because it's kind of a pain to print on 13 different printers if you can just print on one in 3D,
Sure.
right?
So tell me more about these prints. Why are those prints so good? I mean, we already have carbon fiber nylon in some of our FFF prints.
Mhm.
So how do those compare?
So nylon 12 is not as stiff as nylon carbon fiber would be on an S5, and you can test it out. We have the parts here, and you can try and flex them and all that. But I think the main thing about nylon 12, especially the isotropic properties, is that you don't have to worry about your print orientation. You don't have to worry about supports. You don't have to worry about dissolving supports. You don't really have to even think too much about designing for 3D printing.
Right.
Yes, there's obviously things you have to consider, like wall thicknesses, stuff like that. But generally, those parts, once you clean them up and once we get the bead blaster, we would know for sure how they would look after that. But they look like they weren't 3D printed. Right, which is a big problem for, I think, like FFF printers, right? Because you see the layer line.
Yeah.
So selling that product on Amazon, Etsy, or however you sell your products might deter people from buying it because they're not used to the layer lines.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think people are not, when you say a 3D printed object, people who have not 3D printed have very different connotations in terms of what it implies.
Yeah.
And I think SLS parts start to get to the realm where, like you said, it's practically very similar to injection molding pieces, and people can't differentiate the differences, and that makes a big difference in terms of mindset,
Yeah.
for a 3D printed part. So the SLS was something that we thought was going to come out a lot earlier because it was announced a lot earlier. But let's talk a little bit about the future. Maybe not 3 years down the road, because as you've seen, 3 years in the 3D printing industry is a long time in terms of progress. Let's just look at maybe a year or two down the road. Is there anything that you would want to see? Is there anything that you would say, hey, I want to dream about this? I don't know if it's going to happen in 3 to 5 years, but I want to see this because I think that would change the industry again completely. Is there anything that kind of pops up in your mind that would meet those circumstances?
Yes, if you can instantly 3D print something.
Okay, so speed.
Speed is, I think, still a big deterrent for people.
Right.
On FFF, if you print one part, it takes you 5 hours. If you want to print 7, it will take you 7 times 5, 35 hours. If you could print those parts in an hour, 30 minutes, that would just change the game, right? You would start thinking about 3D printing not as a small batch production. You would start thinking about it as like, it's big scale production.
Right.
Get yourself 20
Close
printers.
to mass production.
Yeah, close to mass production. And you have the flexibility of 3D printing, which means you can, if you decided to change your injection mold today, it will take you 3 months to get new tooling, invest in new tooling, and a lot of money. If you want to change your design on a 3D printer, you can do it in 5 minutes. Right. So you're getting feedback from your clients to change your product, you do it the same day, or 2 days, whatever it is. And if you can 3D print fast enough, you would just change the game.
I think I agree with you.
Yeah.
I think right now time is one of those things where, especially if you need more parts than just one, now you're adding time. And with FFF printers, it's a linear process, right?
Yeah.
You add another one, it's going to double the time, and so forth. But let's talk about not just technology, but 3D printing industry as a whole. So before, it was very easy to get a printer and get started and become a small service bureau. Is it still the same now, or is it different because now the field is more crowded?
It's a good question. I think that what changed mainly the past 3 years is that big companies like Ford, for example, instead of outsourcing their 3D printing, they might just buy a printer now, and just go like that, So outsourcing to service bureaus will become a little bit less of a thing for those companies. And if you can 3D print a part, outsource it, not have to think about it, send them an STL file and get it back in 1 or 2 days, that is pretty valuable, right?
Yeah,
and if
sure.
you tell them, hey, I want 200 parts and they can get it back to you in 1 to 2 days, that is even more valuable. So it's changing a little bit. A service bureau will have to provide a little bit more value than just 3D printing something.
So if we're talking about, let's say, some smaller players out there, people who invested in a couple of machines, 2 to 3 machines, and we may not call them a service bureau so much as someone that can supply a lot of parts to a lot of different companies. But for those smaller players, how do they stay relevant in the market? And is there a consolidation? Because anybody can afford a printer now of varying levels and kind of become a personal service bureau. So for those people, how would they keep up with the industry, or is there growing demand along the industry where they don't have to really improve that much? What are your sense in terms of being an individual in the 3D printing industry?
It's a tough question. I think, like I said, 3D printing service bureaus will have to provide more value for people, right?
So that means upping their capability, kind of what you said before.
Yeah, kind of what I said before. If it means if you have some cheap printers and you make good quality parts for people, and now those people want SLS parts, well, if you don't have that capability, you probably lost that client.
Right.
Or you lost on a bunch of revenue there because you don't have that capability. So bring in more capability to your service bureau and kind of bring in more power so that you can offer people more services, more value is number one thing. But also, if you got to look a little bit like, who are your clients today? Is it companies? Because companies will eventually buy a printer. So you would eventually lose that client. So how are you bringing more people in? Are your clients just individuals off the street? If they print fairly often, what's stopping them from getting a $500 kit printer and then forgetting about you? So I think for service bureaus, that they're gonna have to figure out how to stay relevant for their clients.
And then in terms of professional users and companies as a whole, I think their knowledge level and their comfort with adopting 3D printing technology has slowly increased in the past couple of years.
You'd think so, but I think that because of, it depends on which company you're looking at. If you're looking at startups, you have a bunch of young people working there, they would be very familiar with 3D printing. They use it in school, they use it in high school. Our 3D printers are everywhere, right? But if you're looking at older companies that have a little bit of this traditional corporate type mentality, maybe their older generation, the 40, 50-year-olds that work there, they don't know about 3D printing.
Right.
Maybe they've never used it, they're not up to date, they don't know that it costs, that it doesn't cost $100,000, that it costs $5,000 now. So I think that is still a big pain point for a lot of people. And especially operating those printers,
But do you think that'll change in the next couple of years? Because, we are starting to see slightly higher adoption rates. But at the same time, because we were saying how some service bureaus might be at risk if the company that they serve is now like, hey, it's that easy to get a unit.
Yeah.
But that's really the rate at which they need to upgrade. They need to judge for their own business, right? What is the likelihood that my customer base will adopt the technology for themselves? So I think in that consideration, what is their risk? Is our companies saying, it's now at the level and price range and capability that we're ready to adopt it and fulfill the parts ourselves? Or are they still like, what, we don't have the expertise. We still need someone to process the parts for us and design and make sure it can print properly. What is your sense in terms of that?
So the way that I see that, the way that it's going to move forward is that you're going to start hiring 3D printing gurus or expert into your companies. So let's just take a company, let's say Honda or Ford. They're just going to start hiring people like me that have been in the industry in the 3D printing industry for X amount of years, and they'll know that they can trust those people or trust me, or that's why we are experts, right? They call us, they're like, what do I need? Who do I need to talk to? Who do I need to hire? What do I need to know in order to actually use 3D printing, right? It's a lot like your CNC shop, right? Those guys are trained professionals that go to school and know exactly what they're doing and know exactly how to make your parts. It's going to be the same with 3D printing, where they're going to start hiring specialized people to operate them and just have these massive departments all around 3D printing, where they iterate, they design, and with 3D printing, the sky is the limit.
For sure. Okay, I think it's a great time for us to wrap up, but I think we want to sum up
what do you think? I wanted to ask you.
Sure,
What do you think? I think you have some thoughts as well.
I do see higher adoption rates for companies, and I think you're spot on in terms of the adoption rate is 100% going to be based on the knowledge and the skilled people out there who can bring on the adoption, because I think there is still a conservatism with regards to adopting technology. But if you have someone in the company who's a champion, who's saying, I've worked with the systems, I've seen the product, I've seen what it can do, and this will increase our capability, and bring that to management in a reasonable manner, I think the adoption rate will shoot up dramatically, but there's just not a lot of people out there right now with those skills to be able to convey that to management and to make a business case for that as well. So I think it will increase. I mean, I think companies are starting to see both the adoption of it from a service bureau standpoint, and the next part would be to how do we reduce those costs even further. I mean, and that's just a business consideration. So I think we will certainly get there, but I think you're right in terms of the knowledge and the experience and the expertise into the technology is probably going to be a much more driving factor than the technology itself. Because this is always increasing, and every year we're going to get some new functions, some new printers that are going to change the industry, but it's really the people who are like, I see the application of that technology, I see the application of those upgrades, and this is how we can change our business, and this is how we're going to drive, you know, more revenue and so forth. So I think it's all a matter of melding the technology and the knowledge and being able to apply that to a business standpoint for those companies to be able to adopt.
Yeah,
so.
That was well put.
Yeah, so I think we'll leave it there. So in the next couple of years, what we expect is people to increase their knowledge base and their use of these systems, and a lot of it comes to individuals and small businesses adopting this technology first, and then kind of pitching that to the bigger companies for adoption. Any final thoughts in terms of, you know what, I'm going to have you make a wild speculation of what might happen in 3 years that we may not expect right now. You'll make one and I'll make one too.
Ooh, I think that metal 3D printing is going to become a more of a gold standard. Like, you're going to have your FFF, your SLA, your SLS, and you're going to have a metal printer that can make parts the same day.
Okay.
You know, companies like Desktop Metal are pushing that, and I think that eventually it's going to become as easy as using an Ultimaker.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think my prediction will be that the medical industry will adopt this a lot more. And we're going to start seeing hospitals have their own 3D print farms. Because I think they have a lot of customizations for patients that require it, but they don't have the expertise or the certification to use in medical. But I think once we get that through that hurdle, you know, we're going to see huge adoption in the medical industry.
For sure. All right.
Great. Well, thank you for joining us today, Felix, and I hope you guys will turn in next time for Talk3D. Until then, I'm Ken.
I'm Felix. Take care.